Adam, welcome to This Is Horror podcast.
Hey, thanks so much. Pleasure being here.
So, of course, we've got you on the show because we thoroughly enjoyed your release Narcissus, which came out around a year ago now. But before we jump into the book, I want to go all the way back to the start of your life because I want to know what some of the early life lessons were that you learned growing up.
Oh man, so I didn't lead any kind of extraordinary life. I don't have a whole lot to report on here. It's pretty average. It was good family. Mom and dad. They worked in the school system. Um, uh, Came up, with two sisters, and pretty much my whole family went into education. So I swore, I said that's not going to be my career path, and I saw the struggles they dealt with as teachers. I said, yeah, that's not me. And my dad's a good man. He said, yeah, find something else. So, I always enjoyed writing, from a young age. And, man, as long as I can remember, far back, grew up reading sci-fi and horror. And, I guess nowadays it just kind of morphed into, they're my primary interests. I like merging, the technology and science with horror and coming up with this genre bending, concepts. But yeah, it's, writing from a young age. It wasn't until I was an adult, I think around 2015 when I really started writing seriously and making a solid attempt at publishing stories and writing my first novel. And um, and I guess along the way you mentioned life lessons. Probably my biggest life lesson looking back would be, don't put so much stock in other people's opinions, and don't let that stifle what I want to do. Because I guess along the way, I would listen to other people who acted like they had been there, done that, or read articles, speaking to how you just don't make any money, writing, or yeah, whatever. Being younger, money is a primary concern, but really above everything, I feel like if you really enjoy what you're doing and you feel compelled to do that thing, like writing, it was a compulsion. I just loved it, and I like doing it for the craft of it. um the money will come later, I guess, in time, if that's meant to be. So it took being an adult and maturing a bit to really realize that later, and just make a go at it. And yeah, so I mean, that's kind of, I probably left out a whole lot of stuff about my life in between there. So I mentioned to Bob, before we kicked off the podcast here, I was in the Air Force. And yeah, so that was early 2000s. And um, so yeah, and I'm kind of all over the place here, but if you have any questions, or I could expand on any of that.
Yeah. If we didn't have any further questions, it would definitely be the
Yeah,
shortest conversation that we've had on the podcast.
yeah,
It's like,
truly.
I don't think they were very prepared for this one, but no, we have a vast amount of questions.
Good, good.
And I mean, you're talking about writing stories from an early age. I'm wondering, do you remember the first story that you wrote, or do you remember the first story that was impactful either for you or perhaps got a reaction from whoever you read it to?
Ah, one of the earliest stories. Yeah, yeah. So my aunt, she would come over and visit, and I would always have a story ready to hand over to, or I would say fragments of this one particular story. And I was just writing little by little, and she always, seemed to enjoy reading it when she'd visit. So, in this particular story, I think it was called A Day in the Sun, and it was about pretty basic, kid level concept here, but the sun would creep closer and closer to Earth, with every passing day. And, things got hotter and hotter, and people were kind of figuring out what they were going to do until, kind of the bleak ending of it. It's obviously not going to come to a happy ending. Yeah. So I think that was probably one of my earliest story memories, I think, of something I put together. I don't know what happened to that story. So yeah, I kind of like to find it and read it again now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that concept and I love how brutal it was. I wondered if there was going to be a solution to stop the sun getting nearer, but it's like,
Yeah.
no, no, it just It
Yeah.
just gets nearer, and then, well, you are literal toast, as it were.
Yeah. It's pretty much how it ended. So yeah. And that was probably one of my first
Yeah,
realizations that not every story has to have a happy ending. It's not every story is going to have an ending. It might be up to the reader to kind of imagine, hey, what happens next. And I think a lot of
yeah,
my work kind of ends, in a similar way. I like to leave it up to the reader to kind of speculate as to what happens ultimately, and it provides for good discussion.
yeah, yeah. Well, I think having some level of ambiguity, it just makes it more interesting, and it means that the story continues beyond the page,
Yeah,
and you're
absolutely.
pondering it, you're considering, okay, well, what is next? Whereas if it's all wrapped up, then that is the end.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
And I mean, if you think about those early times, what were you experiencing in terms of story? Were you reading a lot of books? Were you watching a lot of movies? What were those first experiences with story?
You know, probably more. I was kind of a child of cinema, I think, over anything else. So yeah, all the '80s and '90s horror and sci-fi and everything is what I was really into. Creep Show and Fright Night and Tales from the Dark Side, the movie, and Twilight Zone, the movie, and the Twilight Zone series, the old one and then the '80s one. And I was hooked on that stuff. So Outer Limits, things like that. That's where I derive a lot of my um, passion. For it drove a lot of my passion for writing. To begin with. So yeah, as far as reading, Michael Crichton, Ray Bradbury, or Stephen King's, collections, and yeah. But I think primarily, it's yeah, film was probably my major influence.
Yeah, what were some of the films that were particularly instrumental? Possibly not Blade Runner, according to your post on social media
Yes. Oh man,
recently.
I know I'm gonna catch a lot of hate for that. But yeah, it's no, not Blade Runner. And honestly, I didn't even see that until I was an adult, a few years ago. And I said, I gotta watch this movie. I hear so much about it. And maybe it's just it was such a masterpiece in its day, and I can appreciate that fact. Uh, if, for me seeing it for the first time, maybe it just didn't translate well. Now I don't know. It was such a slog for me, and I say, man, this is a boring film, and maybe I'm missing something here, but I wasn't a fan, and I don't know. I don't know. Mileage may vary with that one, and it does, I think I'm probably an outlier on that. But yeah, as far as horror film, man, probably from too young an age, like I probably shouldn't have been watching this stuff, but like The Howling, that's one that freaked me out, gave me nightmares, pretty young. Um, like I mentioned, Fright Night and Creep Show, and I'm trying to think. I don't know if you remember or if where you were, if you had this. I think it was on Fox, the Fox network at the time, but it was a show called Werewolf. It was in the '80s, like the mid '80s. Do either of you remember that one?
I don't know
Yeah.
that one, but yeah, I knew Bob would.
Well, I'm trying to think, and if it was in the '80s, in the mid '80s,
Yeah.
um, do you remember who the lead was? Because I may be confusing it with a werewolf movie that I believe came out on CBS
Hmm.
that had a the guy he looked like Robert Reed, but he wasn't Robert Reed, and I can't think of his name.
I
He could
think.
stand in for Mr. Brady any day of the week.
Yeah.
So but it wasn't him. It's like you look and you go, man, it's Mr. No, it's not. And
Yeah.
and that may, I mean, that, and it came out around the same time. But I'm trying to think. I've probably seen this werewolf show. I've probably seen it because
It's
that name sounds familiar.
Yeah, it's really weird. Man, I loved it when I was a kid. I think it was '86, '87, somewhere around there when it came out. And the bad guy,
Mhm.
was let's see, it was like Alamo Joe, and he had an eye patch, and he was hunting this teenager down who I think he was a teenager, but anyway, he had been infected, and he transformed into this werewolf. But he's trying to find, the one that did it, and put an end to him so he can cure himself. But pretty simple plot, but it was a cool show, and it had really cutting edge effects for it today. But yeah, that really sticks out in my mind, and I haven't run across but a handful of people who remember that, and surprisingly, it was never. I don't think. Actually, maybe it was recently released to Blu-ray or DVD. But I think there was a hang up with the music rights or something like that for years, and for that reason, it was never able to be released. But yeah. So anyway, stuff like that. Yeah, it was always really cool to me. Of course, a little bit down the line, Tales from the Crypt and stuff like that. So I was always a huge fan of anthologies. Yeah, some of my favorite stuff.
Oh yeah, I mean, I of course like Creepshow and The
Mhm.
Twilight Zone, which you mentioned, and
Yep.
then decades later, I don't know if you remember the Masters of Horror series, but that
Yes.
was so
Yes.
good. Like
And
just the
Fear.
kind of who's who of filmmakers and
Yep.
these
And
like hour-long shorts.
Fear itself was another one. I think Mick Garris produced that
Mm,
or directed that
yes.
one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I love that. I was so bummed when it was canceled. That was some killer stuff there. But yeah, and farther back, Cat's Eye, Stephen King, um, Body Bags, John Carpenter, and yeah. Man, I could go on and on. I love all that stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. And
Yeah.
of course, whilst it's, I suppose, more sci-fi, Black Mirror is definitely up there in the conversation too, in
Mhm.
terms of these anthology series.
Yes, absolutely. Um, Yeah, and speaking of which, so I've seen a few Black Mirror episodes, but I wrote a story not long ago called Likeness, and it was published in Shortwave magazine online. But anyway, the story Likeness, it's about an A-list actress who's on the verge of career burnout, and so she kind of makes a deal to sell her digital likeness to the studios to use as they see fit, and so of course, that's dangerous territory. There, she finds her digital likeness being used in ways she didn't agree to, for political, propaganda and things of that nature, and finds herself embroiled in this government conspiracy with her life on the line. So, but anyway, and somebody, they said, hey, they read it. They said this really reminds me of Black Mirror, and evidently, I don't know if you know what episode I'm talking about, but it was a similar concept on one of them. I want to say it was called like Susan is not okay or something like that. I probably
I
got that.
I know the episode you're talking about, but I don't have the
Oh, okay.
titles
Yeah. Yeah, I
memorized,
said,
but
man,
I know what you're talking
yeah,
about,
I said
yeah.
that sounds really similar. I thought I had a fresh concept here. They said, no, that was kind of done in Black Mirror, but yours is different. I said, okay. Yeah, but yeah, you're right. Cool show. I love that kind of thing. Like I mentioned earlier, the genre blending and yeah, where you can infuse technology and science. I think that's kind of the most terrifying stuff is things that are technologically or scientifically plausible. Um, yeah, because it could happen. In the very
Mm,
near future, if not now. So things are getting freaky out there. With we look at AI and stuff like that, and all these emerging capabilities and gene manipulation, and yeah, so it's becoming reality for sure.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, the deep fake is a thing now, and
Yes.
not even just for sinister reasons, but people are kind of creating these deep fakes for comedy. It's probably not comedy for the person who's being deep
Yeah.
faked, but I
Absolutely.
saw like a number of bizarre Tom Cruise videos that had been put out. And, I mean, if you just like with AI art, if you look closely, there are telltale signs,
Yeah.
but yeah, it's amazing and also a little troubling, that it's
It's
got this far.
it's disturbing, honestly. And people like to make fun of AI and its infancy right now. It doesn't seem to be too much of an infancy. I mean, this stuff is pretty spot on. The way it's getting. But like you said, there are telltale signs. Um, but it's easy to make fun of it. But it's not been out very long. It's an extremely immature technology, and when you consider where we're going to be, 3, 5 years, 10 years from now, my God, it will be indistinguishable from reality. We've got to be able to have these technological checks and measures in place to identify what's AI and what's not. And especially, we're talking about in the entertainment industry and publishing. How do you identify what's AI and what's not? A lot of publishers are saying, "Hey, we want to accept AI content." Well, how do you know? I mean, clearly, straight generated open AI, Chat GPT, whatever content, it's going to be gibberish. But if you've got people out there generating this stuff and then combing over it and manipulating it and polishing it up, and they're submitting it, who's any wiser, really? So how do you know? Yeah, man, it's pretty
Yeah,
destructive and
and
scary stuff out there now. I don't know how they're going to manage it, and especially when we talk about political manipulation of elections and things like that, and propaganda and stuff out there. Um, I don't know. It's going to create a lot of doubt out there where there's already a lot of doubt between sides, and yeah, I don't know, man. It's gonna get really freaking messy. We're not going to be able to tell what was true history and what wasn't. So time will tell.
yeah, and I mean, the AI conversation is something that we've attempted to have on This Is Horror before, and we never get very far because it's so in its infancy right now. We
Mhm.
don't have all the information and the data and the facts. And I mean, I think as well, I mean, for a long time, AI on some level has been used like in all forms of life. And yeah, I mean, you could even have like an argument that even some of the features of Microsoft Word, such as the spelling and grammar check, are a kind of soft AI. So I think there will have to be a
Yeah.
conversation in terms of when people are saying they don't accept AI. What does this mean? Now, I
Mm.
know that the spirit of publishers and people saying it is that it's like, well, we don't want something generated by Chat GPT, for example. But
Hmm.
I think wording, particularly when it comes to legally putting this in contracts, is going to be so important. And like you say, it's going to get so messy and what is and what isn't
Right.
accepted. But I don't know. Like I say, the conversation never gets too far because we don't have the knowledge yet
Where
to
do you
know
line?
exactly what we're dealing with. We're all trying to figure this out.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
No, I agree. It's like where do you draw the line? Because it is the inevitable future of everything. It's gonna be interlaced, intertwined into everything. That
Mm-hmm.
you can't shut it out completely, or you're gonna stifle your own business or your own enjoyment, whatever it is. Like I don't what do you do? I don't know. I think people are. I don't know. There's a lot of unethicalities about it, but there's a lot of great stuff there. There's great,
Mm,
tremendous power behind it, and opportunities to use it, in positive ways. But it will undoubtedly be
Mm-hmm.
manipulated and used in all the wrong ways. So slippery slope. We'll see where it
Mm-hmm.
goes. But I know in entertainment, man, and speaking about the digital likeness stuff, is um, this reality now. That story I told you about. I wrote that a good year or so before stories started coming out. I think it was the first one I heard was Bruce Willis had supposedly sold his digital likeness to studios. I'm like, holy cow! I wrote this story. Like, I wrote this like a year ago. You know what? Are you serious? And then it came out that was a lie. And then I think there were actual proposals from various production companies saying, "Hey, we legitimately do want to pursue this." So I don't think anybody actually bought into it. Um, but things are very quickly going there. Um,
I think
yeah.
that I think the only actor that I've heard of that's done anything and is James Earl Jones.
really?
Gave gave Lucas or Disney rather the rights to use his Darth Vader voice
Hmm.
however they saw fit. So basically he's retired the voice and and gave them the digital likeness of it.
Yeah.
which I could see how that could play in because you know basically I think I counted there's like 12 to 14 actors who have done his voice outside of him.
Hmm.
So it's like every time like a video game or even in a movie and things like that, some of the lines that he says in the video games are not him. They're an actor. If you go to IMDb and look and you see who played Darth Vader, you'll be like looking for James Earl Jones, and he's not in the cast because it's
Wow.
some actor who just imitated him.
Yeah.
And so there's been about 13 or 14. I'm like, well, let them guys just have a shot at it because now it's like, well, we no, we don't need you. We
Yeah.
got James. We got James.
Right.
Is he here? No. We got. He's on the computer.
Right.
Yeah, we
It's
got him. We got him. Yeah.
it's crazy because
And
I mean,
so I'm
like you
like, that's
said,
crappy.
yeah. I mean, why not give it to those people? I mean, if they can imitate the voice, why not? Why do you need
Yeah.
to buy the digital likeness? Hey, there's plenty of James Earl Jones and Darth Vader impersonators out there that can swing that voice. I'm sure. But I think
Yeah.
they're trying to set maybe a precedent by, just having that highly public purchase or the acquisition of his voice, to say, hey, look, James Earl Jones did it, and
Oh yeah.
ooh,
It's a selling point.
right,
Yeah.
it could be just leverage, toward future procurements. I don't know, or a motivator, I guess I would say. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I actually I hadn't heard about that with him though. That's interesting. Hmm.
I think it's an interesting one to consider as well in terms of like our own morality and ethics and what we would consider doing. Because I mean, if a company came to me and they said, we want to license your voice, I don't know why. Maybe this is horror podcast has got really big at this point, and they're offering me like a really substantial sum of money.
Right.
Well, I'm going to at least hear them out.
Yeah, you're going to
I'm going to
consider it.
get a lawyer to look at what we're talking about here.
Yeah.
Because also, I mean, if you're using the Michael David Wilson voice, I'm not saying it, so I'm not endorsing everything that is being said in the Michael David Wilson voice. You
Yeah.
have paid to be able to use it, but that doesn't mean that I agree with everything you're saying. So I suppose, I mean, the amount of money is important here, particularly if anyone's listening. If Spotify, who have a lot of money because they're giving most of it to Joe Rogan, if they want to throw a bit my way for my voice, it's like we got to look at exactly what the contract is saying here. Because, I mean, I think all of us, we would hear them out. We would find out what exactly do you want here. Do
Yeah.
I get a royalty every time you use the effect? That is something to consider too.
Absolutely. Yeah, if anybody says they're not up for considering that, they're full of it, and people can sit, out on social media and say, oh, so and so sold out or whatever, Yeah. If you had the opportunity to consider that, I'm pretty sure you'd sit down and think long and hard about it. So, no doubt, I would do the same. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think the condition would be that there would have to be some kind of public notice or something. I don't know, highly visible, letting people know, hey, this is not the real Adam Godfrey, or before
Yeah.
whatever they spew through my voice. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
I'm sounding like such a sellout, but how visible the terms are would be proportionate to how
Mm.
much they've paid me to begin with. The
Right.
more you've paid me, the smaller we can make that print. We need the print somewhere.
Right.
But
It's got to be somewhere.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I imagine with that kind of thing as well, there'd probably be inevitable terms and conditions that like, you're not using it for hate speech, but then if you throw something in like that, well, now you've got to define what exactly does that mean. So yeah, it
Right.
is
What may be hate speech to you might not be to them, and they can always wiggle out of it and say,
exactly.
"No, no, no, yeah, that's not. That wasn't the intent. You misinterpreted." Yeah.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, but like you said before, I mean, the thing is anyway that in impersonation is getting so good that
Mhm.
there's probably not going to be much of a need for this service anyway. Yeah, that there are going to be people that can almost do an identical impression of any voice. So,
Yeah, as far as audio is concerned, like I guess, video games, whatever things of that nature. Yeah, where it's going to get really interesting is more with the visual, and you can see.
mm,
And I forgot the name. Soren, I think, was the name of the new AI uh, video tool out there. To where you can plug in a little couple line blurb, and it will instantly generate I think it was a 1 to 2 minute video of anything, literally, that you put in, and it's just incredible. What comes out of that? It's. I think somebody, I saw one where they said, yeah, create a scene with a tortoise made out of glass crawling on a black sand beach at sunset. And sure enough, boom. I mean,
mm,
you wouldn't be able to distinguish it from the real deal. It was incredibly realistic. So, yeah, that's the latest and greatest. So I've been reading up on that, and things are really advancing rapidly. So, like the visual element, that's where it's really going to take off. And so, once Hollywood gets a taste of this, I mean, you think of the hundreds of millions of dollars they dump into productions that could just be drastically reduced through use of AI. Are they
mm.
really going to turn down that opportunity? And the viewers are going to balk at it and boycott for as long as they can until they decide they really want to watch that movie. And finally the walls will come down and it'll suddenly be accepted. Um, so I definitely see that happening. Um, time will
Yeah,
tell when. But yeah,
yeah. There's so many tangents and directions we could now take this conversation
yeah.
in. And I mean, I do believe, and I've said before, that I don't think that AI is going to be such a threat to original, uh, soul filled fiction, because
Mhm.
it is the human experience. It is like our imperfections and our flaws that make it so identifiable. And I think something that is kind of trying to replicate that, it will be phony to some extent, because it's not actually coming from a real person. So I think there's a threat to different facets of the creative industry, but I don't think we're going to see writers disappear or musicians disappear or artists disappear, because people want that authentic experience. And you're right that, particularly to begin with, I think that people will view some of these AI movies purely as a curiosity. But I
Mhm.
think, in terms of satiating their curiosity, but also boycotting it, they'll find ways to be able to see it where they're not going to
Yeah.
directly encourage it. But yeah, this is probably somewhat of a kind of creative experiment. But I think historically, authentic, real art wins out. And, um, even if that means that it's got more of a kind of cult or a different readership or viewership, but I don't think that audience is going away.
Mm-mm.
No, I agree completely with you there. There is always, I think, going to remain that human element. Um, there will be a slow conditioning to the use of AI over the years, to be sure. But I think there's always going to have to be whatever's generated through AI. You're going to see these emerging careers, cropping up, whatever they're going to be called. But the human reviewers, where they have these parties of people sit down and review the content, then start to sprinkle in that human element to tweak it to you know real human emotion to start integrating that into the
Mm.
content. So the AI would probably generate the core content, then you'd have your human overlay process to mold that into a more acceptable format for the public. But yeah,
Mm.
and also go back to what you said about original content. And that's the thing about AI and Chat GPT, as far as publishing is concerned right now, is it's not ever going to be original. Not that. It's purely derivative of, the content, whatever it ingests to generate this. It's all regurgitation of what's already out there. So it's not coming up with anything entirely original. So, um, yeah. And I've seen
Mhm.
measures being taken, as have you, I'm sure, people can opt out of that, having their content used. I know Paul Tremblay, he kind of kicked that off a while back, and kind of seemed like he initiated a movement toward that, where people were pulling their data, and there was a lawsuit filed, for illicit use of his information and others, um, his work, I should say. So,
Mhm.
yeah, yeah. I don't know where I was going with that, but just kind of rambling, thinking at the same time.
Well,
But
you said something earlier, and it kind of flows into this when you started writing, how you were compelled
mhm,
to write, and so there's a passion behind that.
yeah,
And I don't think that AI, it can, especially in Chat GTP, can capture that passion. You'd have to have a human element,
hmm,
And so I think that a lot of the stuff that we see is people trying, the pro AI writing group are trying to bypass something that I know when I first started, I was looking for when I first started writing in the 70s and 80s when I was very young, 12 years old, and
hmm,
I wanted a plot wheel. Remember that? Remember the thing? It's like they had this plot wheel. You could turn it and you get all like these little different plots and everything like that.
yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
you could buy them, and my dad would never buy it. He's like, no, figure it out yourself. I'm like,
yeah,
no, but just make it easy, man, and make it plotting, man. You do the plot. And he's like, no, figure it out yourself. And now
yeah,
I'm so glad I learned how to do that on my own
hmm,
by reading and experiencing and writing and practicing that I can't see any other way to do it.
right,
And so if I had a plot wheel now, I probably wouldn't use it. And so
hmm,
to me, I almost see like this AI chat GTP thing being like a plot wheel. And so the proponents of this, they want to use it because they want to bypass the thing that makes writing.
right,
It's kind of like if you're playing a From Software game and I come up with a mod that will allow you to beat the boss.
right,
You can just beat the boss, man. You just press two buttons and you beat the boss. And they're like, well, what's the fun in that?
right,
Right. What's the fun in writing? That's what it
yeah,
is. That's what makes it fun, and it's compulsion and passion.
hmm, absolutely. I agree.
Well, I think the strand of conversation that kicked off this AI rabbit hole that we've been speaking about is you were talking about the short story that you wrote and then
Oh,
seeing that there was similarity to a Black Mirror
yeah. Mhm.
episode. And so you felt, oh, okay, this isn't original. So then you kind of abandoned that story. But I don't necessarily agree with your conclusion that that wasn't original because I think what makes a story original is not necessarily the idea, is not the concept, is not even the bit of the plot wheel that you found, but it's the writing. It's back to that authenticity of your experience. So
Right,
I mean, we could all have a story prompt, or we could go further. We could have a story concept that has some beats that we have to hit on. But the fact that all three of us have a unique writing voice, that would make each story original, even if there are some initial similarities. So, I mean, on that basis, if that story isn't out there in the world, I think you should go back to it because it sounds like a great story.
well, so I'll say, yeah, it actually is. I didn't abandon it entirely, but it did deflate me a little when I found out about that Black
Right.
Mirror episode. I was like, oh man, so it's not as original as I thought, but it is out there with shortwave, shortwave publishing. On their website they have Shortwave magazine, so it's an online only publication. So it's out there. So if anybody Googles lightness, they can find that and read it. So yeah, there was some film and TV interest a little while back in that one actually, but they were ultimately kind of, I think studios shied away from that one because of it cut so close to the bone of current issues and how there are
Mm.
actual considerations for using digital likenesses these days, and you know, in Hollywood. So, which is kind of interesting. Um, yeah, I think it would make a cool, episode or movie, though. One day, maybe once the heat dies a little on this concept, somebody's willing to pick it up and do something with it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the thing, particularly with like the visual arts with movies and with TV shows. It's not just about hitting on the right idea, but it's about hitting on the right idea at the right time.
Exactly.
And
Yep.
there's been so many times where a story has come out, but it's come out too early. It wasn't in the zeitgeist, or there were too many controversial issues that meant we cannot put that out now. So, fingers crossed we'll be seeing that on the screen in the future, but the world ain't ready for it yet.
Right. Yeah, to what you said there, it's crazy how that works, because some films that were flops, when they first came out, don't really find their audience till years later, it's like you said, it's all about timing. So yeah, we'll see.
Yeah. And I mean, you said that early on you had people who were discouraging in terms of your path as a writer. Now, I don't know if they actively discouraged you, but in terms of things they said about money and it being like a difficult career to
Hmm.
pursue, well, I wonder. I mean, you started off at an early age writing. You then said that you returned to it seriously
Hmm.
in 2015. So I want to know, what was the moment when you kind of abandoned it initially? And then, more importantly, what was it that got you back in the game?
It probably initially just it was something I was always interested in, but I just kind of fell off of doing it. I got out of practice, and the more articles and stuff I would read that would, kind of speak to how hard the industry is, and people, authors don't make any money, and it's like, man, I don't know, do I want to waste my time doing that, And so I think, just with maturity, growing into adulthood, you kind of ditch those interests, and just kind of come into your own, and you say, screw it, I'm going to do what I like regardless of money. If it makes money, I'll do it I had my career by that point, I work in cybersecurity and stuff. So I said, well, I'll do this on the side, and whatever comes of it comes of it, but if I enjoy what I do, and inevitably that money will come. So if it's meant to be, if not, whatever, I still enjoy doing it, so um, and I think that was just kind of the turning point for me. Was eventually I didn't care what the world said or what other people thought, because all that's just based on their, subjective experiences and everything, or opinions. And it's not me. I haven't been there and tried that or done that. I don't want to be an old man one day and say, man, I wish I had really gone for it, and just, I'm going to go for it. We'll see we'll see what comes of it. But, yeah, so I do think of all the lost time. I could have been actually going for it sooner. At a younger age, but then I think I didn't have the life experience at that time to really create good writing. Like uh, you know, I feel like at my age now, I'm what I've got to contribute is more valuable than what I would have contributed then at a younger age. So everything happens in its own time, and this is the right time for me now. So yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, it might sound like a strange thing to say, but I don't really think as a writer there's any kind of wasted years, but just because purely just being alive, having life experience, consuming art, reading books, watching films, these are all things that we put into like the kind of inspiration part and that inform the art that we ultimately create. So I mean, even when you're not writing, you're kind of writing, if you see what I
Yes.
mean. You're
Yes.
creating these experiences that you can then ultimately draw from.
Yep. Absolutely. And yeah, I was about to say the same thing, you know. You don't have to be writing every day to be a writer, you know. 50, 60% of the time is going to be brainstorming, you know, and none of that time is wasted time. I constantly have ideas running through my head, and I don't sit down to write every single day, but I'm always thinking about it. My brain's always moving, trying to come up with that new twist or what have you. So yeah, like you said, you know, you don't have to be writing. You know, everything you experience, you know, goes toward that. So that end product. So there's no wasted time. It's just everything will happen in our own
Yeah.
time when it's supposed to. So
Yeah. And talking about experiences, you mentioned briefly that you were in the Air Force. So I'm guessing in terms of the timeline, that was after your school life and your education. I mean, it wouldn't be during like high school. Oh,
right,
just
right.
off to the Air Force on my break, but then presumably before the career in cybersecurity.
Yeah. So I went into the Air Force. I did IT and systems administration. You know, they call it help desk support. Basically, you know, you're fixing computers and doing networking and stuff like that. So probably I think around probably around 2012 or 2013 is when I got into cybersecurity. And I work on the cyber risk management side of the business. What we do, I deal in cybersecurity policies and regulations for the Department of Defense. So, we'll inspect the networks and make sure all the checks and balances are in place before they're authorized to be used in the operational fleet. So, and if they're not passing muster, you know they're full of holes. They've got to go back to the drawing board and fix all this stuff, patch it up before we authorize it for use. So yeah, so I'm more on the policy side of cybersecurity. So I was telling Bob earlier, it's pretty dry work, but whatever. It's none of the exciting stuff, but definitely highly administrative, highly policy oriented on the security control side of business. So that was, yeah, cybersecurity. Yeah, I took a turn into that around 2013 or so.
And so, what does your writing routine and your writing life look like? I'm wondering how logistically you
Oof.
balance the day job with your creative work.
Oh my gosh, man. Wherever I can fit it. So I have a wife. We have three kids, three girls. They're all young, full of extracurricular activities, and I mean we are booked solid. So it's hard, finding that time. So um, on a lunch break, I'll write. If I'm, taking one of them to, one of their practices, one of their sports, practices. In the evening, I'll sit there and write for an hour, hour and a half, maybe late at night, so I kind of just work it in wherever I can. I don't really have a fixed schedule. It's just whenever I can get it in, I try to do that. So yeah, maybe one day, when that money may or may not come, eventually I could do it full time and have a, 8 hour shift each day where I can sit down and put some real hours into it. But yeah, for now, I kind of take it where I can get it.
Yeah. And in terms of beginning writing again in 2015, my understanding is that you wrote a novel called Stimulus.
Yeah, I did.
Was that the initial story that you wrote kind of coming back into things?
Uh, Try to think. I guess it was. Or at least that was my real go at it. I can't remember. I probably dabbled around in some other stuff. But so I wrote that book, Stimulus. That was never published, so it's shelved right now. And I did have representation at the time, and I was working with him, and he was a great agent. We just didn't really see eye to eye on. We didn't have a common vision for the book, I don't think, so it wasn't really working in that regard. And so, I could not mold my product to his vision. It just wasn't working. I tried, but I took his advice, hey, it needs to go here, it needs to be this or that. Okay, yeah, and I'd write to it. That's not quite it. But I wasn't feeling it, like we talked about earlier, if the passion's not there and whatever, that's the heart of it. The passion wasn't in it. So this thing just got more and more convoluted as we went till finally I said, I think I need to put this down, set this aside, and I have another idea I want to work on. And at the time, that idea actually turned out to be a book I just sold to Sourcebook Landmark in a 2-book deal. So that's my debut novel. So that will be coming out next year. It's called Body of Water, and that one really turned out to be something great. So I'm looking forward to that coming out, and that is a very new original concept. So I'm looking forward to seeing how that's received out there. But not to get ahead of myself here. So yeah, I kind of set stimulus aside. I worked on this other book a bit, Body of Water, and sort of somewhere in between there, I ended up writing Narcissus. And I pitched that to Shortwave, and they quickly picked it up. Yeah, I think this would be great. So that was my first real book publication, with that novella. And so that was definitely a great experience working with Shortwave on that one. So it's kind of weird. That one just kind of bloomed out of nowhere, right in the middle. I didn't see it coming. It was an idea that hit me one day, and I said, I think I'll see what comes of this. So I sat down, I wrote it, over a few months, and it worked. And yeah, so that one kind of cropped up, in the middle of those other 2 books unexpectedly. So it was a nice surprise.
Yeah, that's sometimes how it happens.
Mhm.
And I mean, unfortunately, there's no formula or there's no recipe for writing a great story. And
Right.
sometimes it will be a real slog. Other times, like Narcissus, it'll just come to you almost fully formed, and you'll write it, and it'll be like, wow, that was good.
Yeah,
And then
so
the next one, it might not necessarily be the same, and it's like, what? Where
what
did that
happened?
magic go? What
Right.
happened?
And
Yeah.
I hate that. It's like you nail something out, and it's like, oh, I'm gonna get the next one, and and 3 weeks later, you're like, fuck, what's the deal? I did the other one so easy.
And
This is turning into crap.
the
And
hard you
usually it's because
try.
it's too convoluted.
Right. Yeah. So
Yeah. You start throwing in everything but the kitchen sink, and then you manage to get the kitchen sink in there too. And it's like, shit, man, this thing's way out of control now.
yeah. Yeah, I felt like that happened with that first book. I kept trying to add and adapt, and I was like, man, this is not working. It was getting worse and worse. So this thing's looking really rough. I'm gonna put this down, you know. So yeah, between that book, Narcissus, and Body of Water, I ended up finding new representations. So in the end, I have 2 agents now, so they've been great to work with. We do have a common vision. Um, the stars are aligning finally, with us. So I'm excited to keep working with them. So yeah, they represented that sale of Body of Water, and I had already had Narcissus, so they picked that one up for UTA to start shopping film rights, hopefully soon for that one. I'm really excited to see what comes of that. So I kind of, as I wrote Narcissus, I was picturing it on the screen. Like I told you, I grew up, loving films. It's kind of
Yeah.
how I write. I see it on the screen as I'm writing it. And yeah, so I kind of always felt like that one would make a great adaptation. Either a film or a TV show or something. We'll see what happens, but
So, I mean, in terms of representation and literary agents, so, I mean, you said that you had an agent when you were writing Stimulus. You now have another agent. So, did you stop working with the first agent and now you have 2 new agents, or are the 2 agents that you have the original and the new one? I mean, I want to find out a little bit about how this all works and your kind of representation journey.
yeah, man. So for the first agent, so when I was querying Stimulus, and trying to find an agent for that one, I had to have put out in excess of 200 query letters, 200 submissions to different agents, over a year or so time frame for that one. And it's grueling, if when you finally find that agent that wants to work with you, it's like, oh my God, thank goodness, And so the thought of, and to answer your question there, no, I'm no longer with that agent, that first one. As I mentioned, he was a great agent. We just didn't see eye to eye on the vision. So we parted ways amicably. And, I had to go back into the query churches again for Body of Water. And again, I don't know if it was that many queries I put out, but it probably wasn't far off from it. And along the way, you kind of learn, at least I did, and I think a lot of authors out there are probably the same way. I don't know if you've experienced the same thing, but you put it out prematurely to too large of a group, and then you realize, oh, it really wasn't quite as polished as it should have been. But you get one shot, on submission. So you've already blown it with those 20 or 30 agents you shot it out to the first time. And so you go back and tweak it, and you get feedback on that, it starts coming in. It's like, man, it still wasn't as good as it should have been. You continuously edit. So as this is going on over a year period or whatever in these batches, the numbers really start to add up until you finally start getting the full requests. And you're like, okay, now I'm on the right track here. People are digging it. I'm getting some solid responses. So long story short, I finally landed on my agents now. Christy Fletcher and Kelly Karsuski with UTA. So they loved it. And the rest is history with that. So both times, during that agent journey, it was the longest period. And it's so discouraging. You feel like, man, is it just me? Because especially being on, Twitter or, X as it's called now, or Threads, or whatever else is out there, and you see all these other authors celebrating their victories constantly, and you forget that this is really just these people's highlight reels. You're seeing the tip of the iceberg. The old iceberg analogy. You don't see everything under the surface that these people have been through. All the rejection they've faced, the disappointments, and you feel like you're kind of a one-off. It's like, man, why is it taking me so long? Nobody likes what I'm writing, and but we realize later, I came to realize later, man, we all fight the same battles here. And, you just people don't have any idea. They don't see what's under the surface, what you've been through, and none of it comes easily. So for anybody listening out there, just keep at it. You're on the right track. We all hit the same stumbling points and feel the same pains and, same woes. Just keep at it. That's the key. Just keep going. The people that stop, they're the ones that don't make it. So you keep going, you'll eventually get there. But it's rough, man. It's a rough trek trying to find representation out there. And I see a lot of people, speaking to that, like, oh, I'm thinking about giving up. And it's funny, a lot of well-known authors now who are more recently well-known. I remember seeing them, not a year or two ago, talking about how they were ready to quit. They were so discouraged, but they're just thriving out there now. And I'm seeing them as special guests at conferences and things, signing books and stuff. And it's like, it's good to see,
Yeah, and I think sometimes people can put literary agents on a pedestal,
Oh yeah.
and so, you know, they can see somebody on social media, they've got a literary agent, and then the person who sees it, they don't, and then they feel kind of discouraged and like, oh, what's going on? But I think it's important to remember that no literary agent is better than a bad literary
Oh,
agent.
absolutely.
And
Yeah.
a bad literary agent doesn't even mean that they're bad at their job. I mean, they could be a bad fit for you. They're not the right match. You
Mm,
need somebody who you can gel with. And so,
yeah.
yeah, and we see people like Gwendolyn Keist, for example.
Hmm.
She does not have a literary agent. She's doing pretty
Does
well.
very
She's
well.
getting some pretty big deals with Simon and Schuster.
Yes.
So it's important to remember that there are many different paths and ways of going about this.
Yes.
But
Yes.
I mean, I wonder, with that in mind, obviously you'd had a literary agent where you didn't quite have the same vision, so you decided it was better to part ways.
Hmm.
What was it with your new representation that made you think, yes, this is the fit, this is the right agency for me?
Well, primarily, and I do want to touch on what you just said there. Excellent point. And I don't want to imply, oh, you have to have an agent. Certainly, there's all different paths. You don't have to have a literary agent. People self-publish, they indie publish, whatever. It's whatever's best for the author, at the end of the day. So, but as far as, I think it was just the editorial vision when we started brainstorming as to they read the book. Here's our thoughts. We love it. Here's what we think would make it extra great. And they started laying out some thoughts as to where further development was needed, whether it be characterization or, add in this plot point here, shift this. And it all made total sense to me. I could totally get on board with that. And instantly I could see a path ahead. Where before, I'm hearing the ideas, but it doesn't gel with my style. It's not something I would write, not a tactic or whatever I would employ, or a plot I would even venture to approach. Just it wasn't me. I just knew it. I felt it, for a while. Though I tried to make it work clearly, at the end of the day, it wasn't working. So, and I think he felt that too. But in this particular case, we hit it off right off the bat. We had a common vision. So that became readily apparent. So that's really all it was, just hearing each other out. And I said, yeah, I could get on board with that. That sounds good. There was no apprehension there.
For anybody who is currently looking for representation, I mean, based on all your experience, are there any do's or don'ts that you could advise people of?
Yes. Do not send out to too large of an agent pool in the initial stages of querying. Leverage the feedback toward the small pool, first, toward edits to enhance your manuscript before you start sending it out to others. Because like I mentioned earlier, you only get one shot. You can't requery an agent, make it count. So that's a big thing, a big lesson learned the hard way, mainly with that first book. I was like, okay, I'm ready, let's, I researched the agents, of course, I tailored. That's another thing. Tailor your query letters. Don't do this mass submission. You want to find out what the agents are looking for, what appeals to them, what kind of work they represent, be knowledgeable of the authors they represent, and tailor your query letters to, to those specific agents, and that goes a long way in itself. But once you've done that, don't assemble, a 20, 30 agent, list and just blast it out to everybody at once, because then your shot's blown 20 or 30 agents wide. And then all your best prospects are gone on that very early draft of the manuscript that you thought was ready, but come to find out was still very rough, because I know personally, I thought it was set and good to go. Okay, I wrote a book, let's do it. No, there was a whole lot of editing left on that. So learned that the hard way. So, I mean, I think those are the biggest things. Don't harass agents over social media or any other means other than, their approved submission process, their submission guidelines. Those are probably my biggest tidbits, I could offer right there of advice.
And even if going through official means, don't harass them.
Yeah.
Just don't harass
Nobody
them in
appreciates
general.
And I think, and I never personally harassed agents, but I think we've all heard the stories of people harassing agents out there, or you see the agents reporting on social media, like, oh, can you believe I just got this? There's a lot of, I think, pressure built up and frustrations with various authors, who just they're over it, and they might have been trying so long, they might have spent so long in the query trenches, and they just feel disrespected, and they start lashing out at totally the wrong people, and so probably easy for some people to do. They just need to keep in mind, it's just the process, be patient, wait it out. Those agents are dealing with thousands of queries. So it takes time.